Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to the Business and Utility Subcommittee meeting. It is Tuesday. What is today? Tuesday, February the 7th. I'd like to call this meeting in the Business and Utilities Committee to order. Mr. Clerk, can you take the roll, please?
Representative Alexander. Here. Burkhart. Here. Clemens. Freeman. Here. Hale. Holzclaw. Johnson. Here. Marsh. Here. Thompson. Here. Vaughn. Vital. Zachary. Here. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Members, before we get started today, do you have any personal orders from the committee? If not, we'll go ahead and get started. And we have no bills on notice today, but we do have the Tennessee Valley Authority that is with us today that's going to be doing a presentation. And so, members, we're going to go out of session. And if the members of the TVA, if you'll come on up here and take a seat, please. And so just go ahead and make sure your microphone is turned on and state your name for the record. And what we'll do, members, is we're going to hear a presentation from them today, and then when they finish up, we'll take questions at the end. So go ahead, TVA, whenever you're ready.
Dan Pratt.
Greg Henrich. Chris Edmondson.
Thank you, Chairman. It's our pleasure to be here today. I'm Dan Pratt. I serve as TVA's Senior Vice President of Regional Relations. Our organization manages the interface with all of TVA's local power companies, directly serve customers, public officials, and communities. It's our pleasure to be here and look forward to getting into the topic at hand. And before we do that, I'll just take a minute to go through a bit of set the stage on TVA. So pleased to be joined by Greg Henrich, our Vice President of Transmission Operations, and our Vice President of Power Operations, Coal, Chris Edmondson. So I know a few of you have visited TVA's System Operations Center and some of our assets like the Raccoon Mountain facility and other facilities. We appreciate you taking the time to come out to better understand what we do, and we certainly welcome anyone and everyone for future tours. Happy to show you what we do, and obviously appreciate your time in getting to know us even better. So most everyone, I think, is familiar with TVA, but please allow me to set the stage. TVA serves portions of 7 states, including most of all Tennessee except for the Kingsport area. We serve the Valley in partnership with our 153 local power companies. We'll talk more about that and specifically their role in this Winter Storm Elliott event as well. They are represented by 3 great organizations, 2 of which you heard from last week, the Tennessee Electric Cooperative Association, TECA, and also the Tennessee Municipal Electric Power Association, TMEPA. Mike Knotts, Ryan King with TECA, and Brian Soulsby and Jeremy Elrod of TMEPA, who are also here, you heard from last week. Great partners, and we appreciate all they do for the local power companies and for the interface with TVA. The Tennessee Valley Public Power Association, TVPPA, also represents all 153 local power companies and is directly involved in our after-action review that is currently ongoing. So let me forward a slide. TVA has a 3-part mission that we all often refer to as the 3 E's: low cost and affordable energy. TVA operates the 3rd largest nuclear fleet, the 2nd largest transmission system in the country, protecting and preserving the Valley's natural resources, and managing the nation's 5th largest river and dam system, working with the state and local partners to promote economic growth through our award-winning economic development programs. So as a big picture of TVA's service territory, as I mentioned, covers parts of 7 states and virtually all of Tennessee. So we'll take a little closer look at TVA's presence in Tennessee. The bulk of TVA's generating assets are in the state. And as you can see, TVA has a diverse generation portfolio located here, including nuclear, hydro, coal, natural gas, pump storage, as well as some of the contracted renewable energy assets, including wind and solar. The Tennessee River forms a few miles above Knoxville and continues 652 miles until it empties into the Ohio River. TVA's system of dams and locks allows commercial and recreational users to navigate from Knoxville to Paducah, Kentucky. There are 33 TVA reservoirs in the state, 170,000 acres of public land, and 7,700 miles of shoreline. 6 years ago, the University of Tennessee Institute of Agriculture conducted a study that determines recreational and property opportunities along TVA's managed river system create nearly $12 billion of annual economic impact. TVA has around 7,000 employees and 13,000 retirees that call this state home. Everything we do in partnership with our local power company customers. 82 of the 153 of those local power companies are located in Tennessee. Some of our great partners are here in Nashville Electric Service, and the other throughout our entire region here. So TVA also serves several large industrial customers directly. 23 of TVA's 58 directly served customers are here in Tennessee as well. In fiscal year 22, TVA paid the state of Tennessee $345 million in tax equivalent payments. That number fluctuates from year to year, but it's based on gross revenues and generally stays in that range. So in partnership with our local power companies, we serve the end-use customer. We consider them our customers as well and serve those in partnership with our local power companies. Looking more broadly at the full service area, we're proud of our efforts to partner with the state of Tennessee and help grow the region's economy. In fiscal year 22, we're pleased to work with many partners across our footprint in the state to help create and retain 66,500 jobs and attract over $10 billion in capital investment to the region. TVA is helping world-class brands expand or locate in Tennessee, including Meta, 3M, Vocker, Hankook, and many others. TVA also played a critical role in the recruitment of Ford's Louisville City, and we look forward to that coming to shape. Beyond our economic development programs, we're heavily invested in the communities we serve. Our community relations program leverages our diverse workforce to create hundreds of hours of volunteer activities in locations across the state. We also make direct contributions to nonprofit organizations to recognize those who are working to improve the lives of others in the Valley. As a result of the pandemic, we have returned hundreds of millions of dollars to our local power company customers to assist in the recovery efforts. So service is what we're here for. We do it in partnership with the state. We partner with you all. We partner with our local power companies. Again, proud to be here and look forward to diving in more deeply into the topic at hand, Winter Storm Elliott. So with that, I will transition to my colleague, Greg Henrich, to take us through that.
All right, thank you. So again, appreciate all of you all that were able to make the trip down to the SOC, I believe back this fall, the System Operations Center. And so I actually spent from Thursday evening through Sunday morning in the Operations Center with the team as this unfolded, as this transpired. So today I'd like to walk you through kind of the firsthand view of what happened that day, maybe where we've got some opportunities to improve and where some things went well, such as NES's, Nashville Electric Services performance and a lot of our local power companies. I do want to frame the discussion specifically around the concept of reserves, because every utility is required to carry a certain amount of reserves to handle uncertainties. And for example, so for TVA, that translates to 25% in the winter season and 18% during the summer season. And the three main uncertainties that this plans for is your weather uncertainty, your consumer demand uncertainty, and then your unit availability or performance uncertainty. And so I'll touch on those and you'll see kind of how those things unfolded for us on December 23rd and 24th. So to begin, Winter Storm Elliott, this is a map of the temperature departure from normal. And what you'll see in the Tennessee Valley footprint in the state of Tennessee is it's about a 40-degree difference from typical temperatures at the end of December. And unique to this storm was not that we set any new record lows. In fact, all of our generating assets have operated successfully at temperatures of this level. But what was unique about the characteristics of this storm was it came in quickly. So for example, leading up to that week, it was a mild temperatures, and then about a 5-hour period, we had about a 40-degree temperature drop on average, coupled with gale force winds, about 40 to 50 mile an hour winds, and some flash freezing from the precipitation that had happened the day before. And that combination of that characteristics of this storm is what led to some of the challenges we saw in our generation fleet. And Chris will talk about some of those in specifics here in a little bit. And then if you look at our consumer demand, so what you're looking at here is a 10 years of energy consumer data from December 1st through January 15th. And you can see the outlier in this population of data set is this year's, in which it has the orange or yellow rectangle around it. So we actually have 2 meteorologists on staff and 3 independent energy demand forecast models that go into forecasting what we expect energy to be in any given day, every given hour. And in this particular case, when you had a December with a holiday weekend in single digits, the models didn't have enough reference points necessarily to do an accurate forecast. And what you saw as an industry and even our neighboring utilities is there was about a 7 to 10% forecast error across the board for that December 23rd and 24th. So as you can see, even in the years where we had some cold Januaries, the demand for this December date even exceeded those. And then when you look at the other uncertainty around the unit availability or the performance of the units, this is a map geographically of the different asset types, and you can see there's an icon for coal, natural gas, nuclear, as well as hydro. And the ones highlighted in yellow are the ones that either were partially or fully unavailable during this event. And I think this next slide is one that will really illustrate kind of how the event transpired on the 23rd specifically. Because on Thursday, we had milder temperatures. We got all of our generating assets in service and online, preparing for the Arctic front to hit the Tennessee Valley. And what to acclimate you with this graph specifically, the orange line is cumulative megawatts out of service as generators tripped offline. So for example, every step change in the up direction is a generator becoming unavailable for us to serve load with. The blue line is import power from neighboring utilities. So as we lost generation, we do have the ability to import power from our neighbors to offset the power that we would have generated internally natively. And one of the advantages TVA does have is we sit geographically in the middle of the Eastern Interconnect, such that we do have robust transmission lines to our neighbors and the ability to import power. But we certainly want to be cautious about the risk you accept depending on the volume of import powers. So in this particular case, as you can see, one more point real quick, I'm sorry, there's an acronym on the page, ELCP. That's Emergency Load Curtailment Program, which is ultimately step 50 is what you saw Nashville Electric Service as well as the local power companies execute as called the rolling blackouts. But the regulators require every utility to have a plan in place such that if you get to the point you don't have enough generation to serve your native load, you have to be able to protect the integrity of the bulk electric system and the Eastern Interconnect first and foremost. And everybody's going to have a version of what does a load curtailment program look like. And for TVA, we call that the ELCP. So if you look at the left side of the chart where you're coming in on midnight, you'll notice we had about 1,000 megawatts of generation offline and about 1,000 megawatts of imports. No particular concern at that point. We thought we had a good load forecast, we had a good plan, we had generation available. But as you step through the morning hours, you can see 2 things. The CC and CT are combined cycles and combustion turbines. Those are natural gas units. And you see a few of the smaller units become unavailable, and you see some of those steps in the up direction. And then, of course, you're familiar with the Cumberland fossil plant, where you can see the larger step in the up direction, which is when that was a larger generation unit that tripped offline at about 2 a.m. And you can see our response to that is to try to offset that with import power from our neighbors. And as you can see, the blue line lags the orange line for most of the morning, but we do in fact have the ability to import. Some of it just takes a little time to coordinate. And ultimately, we do catch up to where in the time horizon of that 6 to 8 o'clock in the morning, and you can see there's a few hours where it's just flat on both of them, where the system had stabilized, we weren't losing any generation. We had imports that were acceptable and reliable, and that's when we did start calling our communications and making sure we were getting the notification out, albeit admittedly a little late in the game. We'd like to have done that earlier in the morning, but as you can see, this was transpiring quickly on us, and we were in a bit of a reaction mode, anticipating that we're going to be able to meet our customers' energy demand with various other generators or purchase power. But then as you entered into that 8:30, 8:45, 9 o'clock time horizon, you can see 3 more generators tripped offline, and you can see as the blue line starts going down, that was where some of our neighboring utilities actually retracted their sales to us, because as the storm moved west to east, they needed their generation to serve their native load and was unable to sell us that additional power. And so when those 2 lines diverge, that's when we no longer had the system in balance, and we needed to call our local power companies to do the rolling blackout so that we could reduce demand, since we had no additional supply at the time. And so that's really the sequence of events as it transpired on Friday morning the 23rd. In a matter of about 9 hours, we lost somewhere over 7,000 megawatts of internal capacity and ended up needing to escalate through our emergency procedures rather rapidly. And for context, our neighboring utilities, this is a map of our neighboring utilities, including how they were positioned with their reserves. And as you can see in the light colored yellow, the SPP and ERCOT, they had reserves that were challenged but were still maintained. If you look at the one called PJM, they had adequate reserves, but it was certainly challenged. And I apologize, skipped over MISO, which is more of the orange color. They were below their reserve margin targets, but were able to maintain serving their native customers. And then when you look at the TVA service territory and the Carolinas, each one of us and the utilities that serve that region ended up below our reserve margins and ending up having to call those load reductions, otherwise as blackouts, in order to maintain the system balance. And just like us, it was the first time in the history of those companies as well to end up having to execute the emergency procedures to that degree. And really that paints the picture of just how widespread this particular storm was, that it impacted this significant a portion of the eastern United States and the utilities that serve their customers there. And so I think with that, I will turn it over to Chris to talk a little bit more about the unit specifically. That might work for you.
Yeah, excuse me. Good afternoon. Good to be with you all today. As Dan mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Coal Operations. I work in the Power Operations Group, which basically we operate and maintain and are responsible for all the non-nuclear generation. We certainly have counterparties that run the nuclear fleet, but certainly the failures and some of the shortcomings that we saw with this winter storm are predominantly in power ops. Specifically, our hydro fleet, which represents about 5,000 megawatts of power, performed very well. The preparations and as well as the technology did very well with the extreme conditions. The issues that we saw were predominantly in our coal and gas fleet. For coal, it's the 2 Cumberland units, which you could see the step chart. The challenge with Cumberland is when you lose a Cumberland unit, it's a significant load drop, and so that certainly was impactful. The other challenge we had was in our gas fleet. A number of our combined cycle and combustion turbine units, we had a number of generation megawatt loss events that we incurred with the extreme conditions that the units faced. I wanted to spend just a minute to talk about preparation. So certainly as you're getting ready to face any storm, right, by name, right, there's a lot of preparation that's got to take place to make sure we're ready. And each of our facilities have preparation plans. Those plans were executed. We had a lot of challenge calls once we knew this front was moving in to make sure that we were as ready as we possibly could be. You may ask yourself, what does that look like? It looks like, one, making sure we have the staffing and the resources needed on site to respond. In some cases, that may mean accommodations, hotels for folks that may be traveling in from other areas. It's making sure that all your winter protection is in place, right? Insulation, heat trace, which I'll talk a little bit more about, inventory levels, reagents you depend on to make sure that power plant can perform through the storm. All those things become really important. And so although we spent a lot of effort trying to make sure we were as ready as possible, some of the systems that we had in place were just not enough to withstand those conditions that we faced. And I'm going to talk about learnings, right? When you go through something like this, you can make as many preparations as you'd like, but you get true empirical data, right, where you've got weaknesses and where we've got to reinforce. And so we'll talk about after action learnings here in a minute. That's really the most important thing to make sure that we get ourselves in the very best position going forward. The other thing I wanted to mention is the type of failures. I know many of you probably have not had a chance to go to one of our power plants, but each one of these plants on the thermal side for both gas and coal depend on sensing lines for critical instrumentation. And so that's basically, if you got a drum, right, what's the pressure in that drum? And so we get that instrumentation through sensing lines. And so a lot of the failures that we saw were where those type of lines froze up, because most of all this equipment is outdoors in the conditions. And so that gives you a little bit of context when you think about protection, right? Insulation, heat trace, we're trying to protect critical instrumentation and equipment that keeps that unit online. And so what I want to do just for a minute is show you a few photos just so you've got some context. The first one here is at the Cumberland plant. And you can see the red circle there. That's actually the 12th elevation. The one above, that's the 13th. And those are supercritical ones through coal plants. At one time, for many years, this plant has provided a tremendous amount of energy to the folks of the Tennessee Valley, roughly around 2,400 megawatts between both units. But where I've got circled up there are sensing lines that measure the pressure in the primary superheat section of the boiler. And so those are the lines that froze up. And if you were to go up there, even on a 40-degree day with wind blowing, it's pretty a lot of just cool, cold area. And so you get yourself at a -3 and 20 to 25 mile per hour, 30 mile per hour, 40 mile per hour gust. It's tough conditions up there. And so you can see the top of the boiler as well as the elevation. And there on the bottom right is really the sensing line. And that's what it looked like when it failed, and you can see it, the insulation around it. There's also heat trace circuits that run inside that insulation. And as I mentioned, what we had in place was not sufficient given the conditions that we faced. If you'll, I guess I'll flip the slide. I apologize. I can do it. The picture here is a couple photos at one of our combined cycle gas facilities in Ashland, Mississippi. This is our Magnolia combined cycle plant. We actually purchased this plant several years back. But this gives you an idea. This is also at the very top of the heat recovery steam generator where the steam gets produced. It's the very top of elevation on that structure. And you can just see, and there's a point I want to make here, our team members, even though we came up short in several areas, the amount of work that they did trying to keep these units online and restoring units where they could was just tremendous. And I know when you come up short, they've got to go home and talk to neighbors and other things, and it's always, right, it's a letdown. And so for all of our team members, I'm very proud of their efforts working in the conditions that they did. And this gives you a couple shots of some of the instrumentation, just like at Cumberland. This critical instrumentation's at the very top of that structure as well. It is enclosed. You can see the box on the right. That's an example of a transmitter and the sensing line that feeds into that transmitter. And typically you'll have a thermostat that controls the heat trace as well as a heater in there to make sure that transmitter doesn't freeze up. If you will, let's flip to gotta keep forgetting, I apologize. This is at our Allen combined cycle plant. This is our newest gas plant, one of the most efficient in the world. in Memphis, Tennessee. And again, you see workers. The one on the left, again, is looking at instrumentation inside of an enclosure. It's all outdoors, but it is enclosed. And then to the right is at the cooling towers where you get a lot of moisture and icing and things like that. The last couple photos is at our Paradise Combined Cycle plant in Drakesboro, Kentucky. The picture on the left, again, is in front of a cooling tower. You can see the ice build up. You see that red light? That's an indicator that your heat trace circuit's in service. A lot of our newer upgrades have that feature, which is really nice because you could lose a circuit during a storm. And so knowing that gives you some response. And then the picture of the right is where, during our preparation efforts, we have to do a lot of temporary shielding, right? One of the things with this storm is the drastic temperature drop and then just the high winds. And so having wind breaks and trying to cover things and sometimes using temporary heaters becomes a piece of battling through the storm and some of the conditions we face. And so I think those are the photos that I wanted to share. The most important things where I started, it's, all right, what are we going to do differently going forward? And so we had each of our stations across all three of those technologies list every single issue they ran into. Some of them are megawatt loss issues because something froze. Others may be safety-related items. But once you experience like this, making sure you track every item to one short term, make sure we get mitigation in place because in 2 weeks we could see another one. And so right now we have around 250 items on that list. We've got 259 units across the fleet, but there was 250, some failures, some good catches, some best practices that we've got on the list, and we've done short-term mitigation on every single one of them to make sure that we're in a much better spot where the weaknesses expose themselves. And then the second thing I wanted to mention is now we're looking at longer-term solutions, and some of that's going to be we need to change our engineering basis for some of these plants, right? With the extreme conditions and the frequency of which we see them, what is the right basis and how do we leverage what others are doing in the industry and get expertise around what else do we need to do to harden these assets, because we know every megawatt counts when you're working through a storm type event like this. And so with that, Greg's got a few more items on the after action review on learnings. I'll turn it back over to him.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yeah, so when TVA is going through a comprehensive after action review, and Chris touched on a lot of the important near term as well as longer term items internally. We additionally have what we call a blue ribbon panel that has former Senator Bob Corker, Joy Ditto, the recently resigned CEO of American Public Power Association, and former CEO of EPRI, Electric Power Research Institute, on a panel evaluating how our after-action reviews are, giving us a bit of an independent review and look over our causal analysis and our findings and mitigation strategies. Again, internally we have multiple work streams. Certainly some are in Chris's area and power operations at the site specifics. Some of them will be within the System Operations Center, which some of you all have toured. Other work streams will be around our communication plan and making sure it's more resilient and robust in advance of an event like this. And there's additional customer interface panel that I'll actually, Dan, you might be better served to talk about that one.
Sure. Yeah, before we turn it to questions, so just concluding on the after-action review, as has been said, it's trying to be as thorough as possible, but there are two sides of it. What can we do immediately to put this in place, both from a generation asset side and also from a readiness and a preparation from a communication side? So those actions are being addressed immediately, as well as the longer-term after-action review. So we do have 10 local power companies, as well as the association I mentioned earlier, Tennessee Valley Public Power Association, and our direct serve association, Tennessee Valley Industrial Customers, also as part of that. And so they will also be part of the detailed after-action review. We will use the committees of those associations to help work through some of these issues, like an upgrade, full review of our emergency load curtailment program, et cetera. So the timeline for that is roughly the first quarter end of March, early April, we'll be in a position to talk more in detail about the full and definitive causal evaluation, gap identification, and near-term and longer-term actions taken at that point. So with that, I think we'll conclude and welcome any questions.
Well, gentlemen, we appreciate that presentation, and I'm sure we have some folks here with questions today, and I will remind the committee, and I'll let the gentleman from TVA know that make sure you're recognized. We kind of control the dialogue here, and we don't want to break off into one-on-one conversations here, so that would be my only advice. And do we have a list? Members, do we have any questions? Representative Clemens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for providing more explanation of this and providing some images. I know my community suffered during this blackout for multiple reasons, not just the rolling blackout issue, but some local ones. But I do have a few questions. On your Blue Ribbon panel, are you going to have opportunity for public input? I missed if you said that.
Dan, you know the answer to that?
Dan, recognize.
It's actually a good question. I probably don't want to misstate it. So at the moment, that my assumption is the Blue Ribbon panel, as opposed, in addition to the TVA team, will certainly be at a position when concluding to be able to discuss it more publicly. And so I am certain there will be that opportunity at some point in time, but happy to follow up with any details.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, did y'all decide to go ahead with the gas build-out at Cumberland despite this, and if so, why?
Chris, you recognize.
Yeah, I'll answer that one. January the 10th, we reached a record of decision for plans for the Cumberland Reservation. We finished about an 18-month to 22-month NEPA process, and basically, to answer your question directly, the plan is to retire both of those units. The first unit is slated to retire by the end of 2026, and the second unit by the end of 2028. Right now, the only replacement that we've got plans for is for the first unit, which is a gas combined cycle site on the Cumberland Reservation. The second unit, we've got more work to do on what would be the replacement option there, what's the right decision. So we've got to walk through a similar process on evaluating those options.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last question. So, with regard to your solar providers and your wind energy production, did those solar or wind energy have any issues during the winter storm?
Greg, you recognize.
So with solar not actually contributing to the peak hours because those happen before sunup and after sunset, we did have about 40 to 50% of our solar capacity generating during the daytime hours of Friday as well as Saturday, and about the same amount of wind capacity from that asset class as well, which is about a 40 to 45% capacity out of that fleet of wind turbines.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And did any of those have a failure or outage in any way as a result of the storm?
Greg.
Not to my knowledge.
Thank you.
Question to any of you: what units actually failed? What can you list the specific units that went down?
Yeah, for Cumberland, it was both units at Cumberland failed. For gas, it was roughly 30% of the unit base there, so it would be a pretty lengthy list. I can't give that offhand, but we can certainly provide that.
Was it the sensing lines on all of them? Was it the cold wind? Is that what caused it on all of them, whether it be coal or gas?
Yeah, the majority of the megawatt loss events were due to sensing lines freezing up, critical instrumentation that froze up. There may have been a few exceptions where there's water lines that are needed in certain areas. They may have frozen, but the majority of our issues were with instrumentation and sensing lines.
Was there any common denominator as far as the age of the unit? I mean, were they older or newer, or do you have anything to?
Well, for Cumberland, I'd say those are the only two boilers that are outdoors from the 7th elevation up, and so if you compare that to our other four sites that are in service, all that stuff's enclosed, and so I think that's certainly a differentiator for Cumberland. For our gas units, we did see some comparisons, I think, with units that were a little bit more older than newer ones. Allen combined cycle, for instance, did perform very well. One of the challenges when we talk about design basis, we have purchased facilities over the years, and so we've got some inconsistencies with design basis that we feel like that's going to be a learning that we want to make sure we take action on.
And I know you guys are still conducting an after-action review of this, and y'all are taking measures to mitigate against this happening again, but it seems like the obvious solution from all of us watching this is that those sensing units need to be enclosed or brought indoors. Is that something you guys are doing, or are y'all just trying to insulate them a little better?
It's going to be a combination of both. I do think that wind breaks make a difference, and so where there's opportunities to gain permanent enclosures in certain areas, we certainly will be looking at executing that. In some areas, it's hard to apply that, just given the way the unit is laid out, but that's why we want a full engineering team on, hey, what all can we do to make these things hardened and make them more reliable?
And then where are we right now? I mean, if a storm hit next week similar to this, are we in the exact same position again, or have some of the measures that you've taken, will they provide some protection that we didn't have before?
Yeah, we feel very confident that we have hardened the areas that we failed. Roughly 250 items that I mentioned, we have verified and actually had independent teams come to each site to make sure that we're comfortable that what we've got in place will hold up. Now, it's hard to guarantee 100%, right? Because when you're dealing with a storm, you just don't know what all you're going to face. But we feel like we have certainly taken action on every item that caused us issues before.
And when the emergency load curtailment program ended, we got everything back online. Was that it actually warmed enough, or did electricity finally become available from some of the surrounding utilities? What happened that fixed this?
Yeah, so great question. Several things. On Friday, for example, we did get some warming during the day, as well as some of our generation units did come back in service. In combination with some of the neighbors were able to supply additional power and emergency power. If you fast forward into Saturday morning, again, some of the generation that had returned to service was still available for us. We did, in fact, then lose some of our purchase powers again for a period of time, which is when we reenacted it for the second time. And then on Saturday afternoon, you just received some of the warming as the storm front has begun to pass, and you got some of the warming as well as some of our additional units back in service. So it was a bit of a combination depending on the timing.
Thank you. Speaker Marsh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all very much for being here today. And I'm sure that was a traumatic event that you went through. And what I wanted to ask is, what percent of your total power is renewables, solar and wind, and what percent is nuclear?
Greg, you recognized.
Wind and solar specifically is a small percentage in about the 3 to 4% range. And the nuclear is just above 20%, I believe. Is that? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, about 20%.
Speaker Marsh? Yeah. Speaker Johnson, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You had mentioned importing electricity from other states. Do you export to other states?
Greg, you recognized.
We do. When we have a surplus of power, we would be able to export. We could.
So
yes,
Speaker Johnson, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. During the blackouts, whatever we call them, were we exporting at that time?
Greg, you recognized.
we did not export any power during this event.
All right, thank you.
Chairman Vaughn, you recognized.
Thank you for being here today and talking about this and reliving it. I know it's probably not that pleasant of an experience for you, much as it was very unpleasant for the customers of your monopoly. I get my retail power from Memphis Light Gas and Water. They're the monopoly that serves us, and the retail monopoly that serves us in the Mid-South area. And when we were looking, or when their board was looking for alternative distributors, the TVA tended to be a one-trick pony. Their trump card was always, but our reliability. Our reliability. How do you think this event has shaken people's trust in you as an organization with regards to you're pardon the expression, but you're kind of you're viewed as being somewhat unwieldy because some days you're a private organization, some days you're a public organization, depending upon the topic at hand. How do you think this has affected your position in the marketplace with your retailers?
Dan, you recognize.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think we have been working with Memphis Light, Gas and Water and Nashville Electric Service and all of the local power companies as part of this after-action review. Like as already mentioned, a couple things I would say is, as Greg alluded to earlier, the emergency load curtailment program, what we would call step 60 is TVA's, if needed, the step that would have TVA interrupting large blocks of customers. So the good thing of this event is that was not needed. And it was needed because of the partnership with our local power company. So ELCP, Emergency Load Curtailment Program, Step 50, is a step that is drilled on twice a year. It's actually a collaborative program developed by TVA and the local power companies. And so it is something that was anticipated. Fortunately, it's never been used, and it was put in place specifically to recognize the ability for local power companies to interrupt and curtail load in a more kind of methodical way than TVA opening up those larger areas. So from that standpoint, what was supposed to happen happened, and it helped create the stability needed for the Eastern Interconnect. So there's a lot to learn from it, I think, from all of our standpoint. I understand the question about reliability. It is TVA's goal, as it is, I know, all of our local power companies' goals, to keep the power on all the time. And so we will learn a lot from this. I think there's certainly opportunity to get better in all aspects of this. But I think that the collegiality and the understanding and the partnership with our local power companies to learn from this and get stronger remains strong.
Chairman Bond, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regards to the Step 50 program, when you define, could you lead us through how it's determined who is a part of the Step 50 rolling blackouts? Is that solely up to the retailer, or do you define it in how much load you're shedding, the types of loads? Because I know that in some cases, the loads that were shed it was very detrimental to those businesses to be caught so off guard. And some of those things, some of those fuel transport stations, fuel depots who were trying to get, frankly, heating things that keep people warm, it was really causing a problem with that. And we had vapor lock. There's also issues with data processing facilities that were really knocked offline and then coming on and back off. Is really a unfortunate series of events. What kind of guidance does TVA provide to the retailers on where they pick up this load? And again, if it's defined as a percentage of demand or not?
Dan, you recognized.
Yeah, again, at the high level, happy to talk about the emergency load curtailment program. So steps 40 and 50. Step 40 would be, in essence, a local power company requesting customers to voluntarily curtail. 50 would be a methodical rolling blackouts, as has been mentioned. So procedurally, each of the local power companies prepares their own ELCP response plan, and they themselves look at different sectors of who they serve and how they would roll. And that could even be different for different percentages, whether it's a 5% curtailment or a 10% curtailment. And so generally, I'd say it varies across all the local power companies, but it is determined and executed by each of the local power companies.
Chairman Vaughn. Representative Freeman, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You spoke about, and I missed the term, the emergency reserves during the winter of 20% and during the summer of 17. What was the term you used there?
Greg, you recognize.
Just planning reserves.
Planning reserves. Thank you.
Representative Freeman, you recognize.
So, and then I heard you say a second ago that you're reviewing whether or not those planning reserves are adequate for future weather events. I've got a couple of questions. One, at what capacity are all of these facilities operating? And second, how would you increase that reserve capacity? Are we talking about building new plants? How do we address that?
Greg, you recognize.
Yeah, so we actually, about every 3 years, perform a study that makes sure to really ensure and determine, do we have the proper reserves based on the asset portfolio that we have. And as you can imagine, you're looking forward about 5 years. And as our fleet transitions from any asset mix, you're going to want to make sure that you've got the right mix of asset, or the right reserve margin, so that you have those in reserve, the contingencies. In this particular case, we assume all of our plants are capable of 100% output, but there may be instances where they have a degraded equipment that might limit how much they can produce. And if that's the case, we certainly adjust what we expect out of that particular plant at any given time. But we review that, and what ends up happening, to your point, if we need to make an adjustment to that reserve margin of 25%, then we would have to build additional generation internally. So we need about a 3 to 5 year time horizon in order to construct a new generation facility if, in fact, we were to increase our reserve position.
Representative Freeman. Representative Alexander, you're recognized.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today and explaining this to us. When you talk about the reserves, did you also say something about your customers, the electric companies that buy the power from you? Are they required to keep so much in reserve as well?
Dan, you recognized.
Thank you. No, they're not. They're actually not counted in the actual generation reserve margin, with the exception of the, they're not, is the answer.
Okay.
Obviously, we do lean on two ways to assist in situations like this. One, our directly served customers and other large commercial and industrial customers actually have contracted interruptibility, and I don't know if that's actually been mentioned. So we have programs such as a program called IP5, IP30, interruptible product. So our larger customers allow themselves to be interrupted because it is an economic way to benefit all customers. Those customers were also called earlier on during this event. And then, of course, we have the partnership with our local power companies on instituting the emergency program when necessary.
Representative.
Thank you.
I have another question. So I think I heard a minute ago that y'all do have some combined cycle generation. Is that used mainly for the peak? That's not used for base load, is it? Yes.
Yeah, our combined cycle fleet is more of an intermediate load. Some of them, the more efficient ones, depending upon gas prices, can run significant amounts close to base load. But for the most part, they're more intermediate load. It's a nice asset because it's flexible from the standpoint of turn down as well as cycling.
Okay. Did y'all have problems with any of them?
We did.
Okay. Members? Representative Vital, you recognize.
I appreciate you being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I would ask the question about nuclear. Did we have any problems with our nuclear plants that were online during the storm?
Chris, you recognized.
We did not.
Thank you.
Well, members, if there's no additional questions, then I will thank our partners from TVA for coming today. Appreciate y'all bringing this information, and you've made the PowerPoint available to us, and I'll be sure, if you don't have it, to get you a copy. And anybody that would like one, let us know, and we will go back into session. Members, do we have any more personal orders or anything for the day? If not, then this meeting is adjourned.